right, so let's get started with the ones we have right now. Thank you for joining, everyone, especially during the times we're living in. I know it's challenging. Well, we know it's challenging, but we do this because we want to still support our community, and we want to continue giving you tools to learn and to grow your business, which is very important, all things considered right now. So my name is Eduardo. I am the Director of Operations of Caper, which is a technology company focused on AI for retail. And I'm also part of the programming board of StartOut. And with us are Erhan Sawyer Osman from Two Sigma Ventures and Megan Kelly from First Round Capital. But I will let them show off how cool they are and their companies and what a little bit of what they do. You can start, Megan.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Megan Kelly, and I am an investor at First Round Capital in New York. We are a seed stage sector agnostic fund with offices in San Francisco, Philly, and New York. And our bread and butter is really investing and supporting founders at the earliest stages of company development. Erhan, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Also, really excited to have this chat with all of you. I'm an investor with Two Sigma Ventures. We're based out of New York City and San Francisco. We typically invest in early stage seed, Series A, Series B, but really the Series A is our sweet spot. So perhaps one round after Megan. And you know, we're a generalist fund, and I think we just closed our third fund at the beginning of the year, which is just shy of 300 million, and we're generalists, so we are pretty broad in terms of sectors, but we do love companies that are data driven and looking to use the trends around data science and compute in interesting ways to solve whatever problems they're trying to tackle.
Well, there you go. So we have seed stage and Series A and beyond. So there's a good mix here of investors. And then Two Sigma just raised just 300 million. So it's good. Now we're all excited about the questions you sent. I think that it's a very good mix of questions that are pointed to the times and also interesting. So we hope to answer as many as we can. We received tons of questions, so we've chosen a few that hopefully cover most of what we're going to talk about. So let's see. The first one. Has the fundraising environment for you maybe about valuation, the timelines, or the expectations you have for founders, potential founders or staffs due to the pandemic?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that one. I think it's first important to take a step back and just think about kind of how the broader macro environment has changed. So I would say that we've definitely transitioned from a risk-on environment to more of a risk-off environment. So generally, what does that mean? I think you're seeing kind of across the board, investment pace is definitely slowing a little bit with a few exceptions, but I would say pace across most funds is, you know, people are pausing a little bit just to assess the current environment. Next, I think funds are moving more from a kind of trust me to a show me type approach in terms of when they're evaluating business opportunities. So they may want to see, you know, show me that one geography that you have moved into that you can prove this business model in before we get to 10, versus before it was, I'll just trust you and I'll assume that you can get that done. I think there's a little bit more caution given the macro environment. And lastly, I think before there was so much dry powder out there and so much capital that everything was kind of backable. So whether it was juicers or scooters or whatever it may be, I think a lot of people were able to find capital. And I think you're seeing a little bit more of a shift towards more high margin, shelter in place, resilient businesses, kind of more in the software space. But again, we're still seeing a ton of investment happening. And I think the biggest thing in terms of timeline is things are just taking a little bit longer. So fundraises, where before you maybe could have gotten it done in 8 weeks, you should really plan for more like 6 months and hope that it takes shorter. But again, there are just so many unknowns out there that things are just taking a bit longer.
And going to Megan's point, Erhan, do you think that B2B SaaS or software-based companies have a better shot at getting funding than more riskier companies, even if their industries are not directly affected by COVID?
Yeah, so I guess the way I would think about it is probably if before COVID, there was probably a different answer than today, right? So if you're building an enterprise SaaS company where the majority of your customers will be in the retail space, and I don't mean e-commerce, let's say it's brick and mortar retail, then potentially you're going to have a more difficult time than if it's more generalized enterprise SaaS solution that could potentially be used by any company. So there is still, whether it's aside from just business model, I think you're still going to see discrepancy in terms of companies that are funded in, as Megan mentioned, areas that are resilient to the sort of shelter in place that we're experiencing versus ones that potentially aren't, regardless of the business model. And then I guess maybe just to put my finance hat on and say, the reason that enterprise SaaS does well in these types of environments is because given increased uncertainty, what enterprise SaaS does is it provides a recurring revenue model. So the idea that you can sort of have visibility into future cash flows, even though like, I don't know what's going to happen in the next month or 2 or 3 months, but you know, it's fine because this company just signed a contract that is, that will last 2 to 3 years. So like all of a sudden, if I can build up enough of those, regardless of whatever happens in the next 2, 3, 4 months, I have visibility into what those cash flows look like. And that's generally why people, I think, not only in the startup world, but also in public markets tend to like SaaS type companies. And then that's sort of why you get a higher multiple as well. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's like a little bit of a technical fact and a little bit of a practical fact as well.
Yes, and say that you have a startup that is a bit risky, but you already invested on that one, and you have a new startup that is just as good the idea, but they are just approaching you for the first time. Would this situation affect your decision to invest in the new startup, even though it is as good and as relevant to your industry? Megan and Erhan, you can both answer that one.
Erhan, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that I understand the question. So the situation is that we are presented, or we're speaking with the company that is just as good as perhaps a company that we funded previous to the pandemic. And I guess is your question like what's the difference in terms of the process, or I just want to make sure I understand.
And both of them are in a risky market, so to speak.
Yeah. During
the pandemic, would the new startup, you may think twice before investing, even
I mean, first of all, I think like everything that we are funding at both the pre-seed, seed, and Series A is incredibly risky. Mm-hmm. So that was true before the pandemic. It's true during. It'll be true after. The number of challenges that like portfolio companies go through as they evolve, as you probably have been through yourself with Caper, and sort of see the you see the inflection to that exponential growth, like there's lots of bumps along the way. So I guess to some extent, it's like every risk, every investment that we make, we take for granted that it's incredibly risky. And that's sort of the whole nature of venture capital. It's like high risk, high reward, right? If you hit it out of the park, you really, really hit it out of the park, and it can do wonders for the fund. So that maybe that's that. But I think just going back to risk, like there's a few ways that you can adjust for risk, and certainly one of those is in terms of valuation. So from the perspective of, and if you get to that point, and I have other views on how people should be thinking about valuation, but essentially what it means is that previous to COVID, valuations were almost priced for perfection. Like that given that the market continued the way it was, and this company was able to execute, then it could be worth X, and then sort of discounting that back and thinking about what that value is. And so now that you don't have perfection, so that the valuation that you can expect is potentially lower than what you would have been able to get previously. But that doesn't mean that the company's not fundable. It just means that the market has changed, and so the value that you can attribute it, given the new risks from a macro perspective, are sort of taken into consideration. Although this is a whole other discussion, but I feel like, I don't know, Megan, what your views on valuation are. I worked closely with the founder of Jet.com, who's now the president and CEO of Walmart.com, Mark Laurie, and he has speaks a lot about this idea around valuation. And I think just the bottom line is to really, like, don't worry about valuation so much, because like at the end of the day, like a smaller percentage of a really big number is still a really big number.
Yeah.
And what do you think, Megan, since for those of you that haven't seen what First Round does, the slogan is no stage is too early. So what would be your view on investing in a new company that is risky?
Well, for us, if we've already invested in a certain company, we won't invest in something that will be competitive in that. But kind of disregarding that fact, I think something just to take into account is when you're going in to pitch your company, I think you just have to have in the back of your mind, what is the effect of COVID on my business? Is it good, bad, or neutral? And how are you positioning that at the very front of the conversation? And being very honest with yourself and with the investor of just saying, these are the near term, this is what I see as the near term and the long term repercussions. And this is how I plan on structuring my business around those factors. And I think the more that you can have that conversation openly, the more you can help the investor think through de-risking those pieces that may make your business particularly risky, at this stage.
All right, that's a good answer. And now, what do you think? Many people ask, what would be a good approach, a good way to approach investors in this during the pandemic, new investors, since obviously there is not a normal time. So should they change the way they approach investors, or is the same that it would be 3-4 months ago?
Yeah, I think, listen, everything is happening over video, as we all know right now. And it's harder to build those relationships. So I think the first thing to do is, rely more on your existing relationships. If you're reaching out to a certain investor, a warm introduction is always better, whether it's from another founder that you may be mutually connected to, or another investor, or whoever. Just creating some connection is helpful. But cold outreach is still okay. And I think also, again, thinking about tweaking your pitch deck. So we're all living in this COVID reality. And so upfront, in the first 5 to 10 minutes of your discussion, think about, is my business impacted in a good, bad, or neutral way? And do I have a few slides that address that? So that isn't in the back of the investor's mind when you have those conversations. And then, really bringing the animation when you're having these discussions over Zoom. I think it's so easy. We're all experiencing Zoom fatigue, but trying to bring your best self forward and have as much of an engaging conversation as possible is helpful. But to start out, when you're kicking off those initial, discussions, try and do it through a warm intro if you can, and be scrappy about it.
And Erhan, what do you think how do you think virtual pitches will affect the relationship with investors or the communication for the foreseeable future? Do you think you may get used to it, or you feel a gap between you and the founder or potential company that you would found?
So it's really interesting because I feel like, there's really no precedent for what we're going through. And so even at the very beginning, it was like we didn't know how it would unfold. And you heard a lot of VCs sort of step back and say there was like some like in the first few weeks that were very focused on their existing companies and just trying to work through those and help them out and be supportive. And some that would say like, I can't imagine, investing in a team that I haven't met before. And so that was sort of a debate, like, can we fund the team that we've just only met through Zoom? And it's like, fast forward to, what is it, June 2nd now. And it's like, oh yeah, can we invest in a team that we've never met before? Sure. The dynamics around, or the practicality around that VC funds have capital that they need to deploy on behalf of their LPs, right? So they can't just stop investing. It's not, their role is to find ways to deploy that capital in good times and in bad. And so to the extent that that's the case, I think more and more VCs are finding ways to reach out with communities, whether it's through panels like this or through other networks. But I'd sort of echo what Megan says is like, rely on those warm intros and, try to get like that chain and say like, okay, after I finish this conversation, I'm going to have one more that I sort of lead the conversation with, and keep that going until you can get to the right people to listen to your story. And I will say that the VC community, the way it works is sort of like all of us are tight in these networks. And as soon as one idea comes and someone's really excited about what you're doing, it like starts to spread like a mini wildfire. And so it's something you should very much dedicate your time to, is just getting in, doing what you can to get warm interest to the right people.
And Megan, bringing back a point Erhan made earlier about there's no perfection. In your case, for example, that you invested recently in a very early stage startup, and because of COVID, things may have slowed down, meaning that there are probably metrics that you were asking for before that now are not as achievable, not because the company is doing something wrong, but because it's just simply not doable. How did you adapt as an investor or as part of the board to those changing metrics based on the pandemic? What things do you ask that you wouldn't ask before, and vice versa?
Yeah, so I think for us, really, like when we think about early stage investing, seed stage investing, there are no perfect numbers or magic metrics to kind of necessarily hit. So much of seed stage investing is making a bet on the individual or the group of individuals who are starting this business. And for us, even more so in COVID, we're so hyper-focused on who those people are, and really like, how have they gone about making decisions that have led them to start this business or get it to where it is today. So like one thing we think about is, are these people heat-seeking missiles? So I think the analogy works well, and essentially like, do they have an ability to navigate towards a destination and find true north? And so that means, are they constantly collecting data along the way so they can look for bigger and better targets? And so, the things that we'll be thinking about when we're talking to those people is just, what kind of customer interviews have you done to kind of validate some of the points that you're thinking about? And what is the other data that you've gathered along the way? And again, I think it comes back to choices. Like on the product side, you may have a lot of times products shift so much when it's pre-launch. So you're really thinking about, okay, what is the longer term vision? So we want to really dive into with founders in our early conversations, what are these little micro product decisions you're making, and what are the insights that you're using to make those decisions? And then lastly, just thinking about, how thoughtful are founders in the markets that they're going after? Because the bigger the market, the more targets there are for that missile to hit. And so for us, it's less specific, like hardcore metrics, but kind of those bigger picture items, and really diving into kind of the micro level of each of those pieces.
Hey, Megan, I have a question for you. Now I'm the one who's asking the question.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes to the live Q&A where someone was asking about, I don't know if you saw it, but it's an interesting question, and maybe I'd love to hear your answer to this question, but I would love to hear how you think, as a primarily seed stage investor, of founder market fit. How important is founder market fit? Is that sort of is that a distinguishing factor in terms of what gets you excited? And then in general, I think this question is great. Like what are some of the other attributes that really make it a compelling case to invest?
Yeah. So I think founder market fit is a huge piece of it, and something that we think about very closely. So in addition to them having strong founder market fit, also heat-seeking missile piece I kind of mentioned, but also if you think about life, there are certain people who are map followers and syllabus followers and just kind of like go down the directed path that they're supposed to go down. And then there are other people who figure out, how to carve their own path and demonstrate a pattern of really breaking off from the crowd and doing something super unique. And those are the instances that we look for in founders, because exceptionalism isn't built when you're all of a sudden raising your hand and saying, I'm going to start a company today, but it's built over a career or your lifetime. And so those are the things, especially in this environment when we can't really get to know someone one-on-one, that via multiple Zoom calls or multiple reference calls, we're going to be digging into those factors. So more than ever, founder market fit is definitely important. And we want to make sure that the person who is tackling an opportunity is the right person for it, has a passion for it, and has done all the kind of micro research and gathered the insights along the way to make this a big business.
Now, we have a lot more people than when we started, so let's reintroduce ourselves just for those that didn't hear who we are. I'm Eduardo, Director of Operations of Caper and part of the programming board of StartOut, and we have Erhan and Megan, and you can go ahead and explain who you are.
Erhan, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm an investor at Two Sigma Ventures. We're an early stage VC based out of New York City and San Francisco. We tend to focus on seed, Series A, Series B, although Series A is our sweet spot. We just closed our third fund, which is just shy of $300 million at the beginning of the year. And while we're pretty much generalists and will invest in anything that's tech enabled, I think what really excites us is the intersection between data science and computing. So any founders that are doing that are taking methods related to data and applying it to the problem that they're solving gets us really excited.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for having me. I'm Megan. I'm an investor at First Round Capital based in New York. So we're a seed stage sector agnostic fund. So we're investing across sectors, and we have offices in San Francisco, New York, and Philly. And for us, we've really built our bread and butter product around helping businesses get off the ground at the earliest stages. So both pre-seed and seed.
Great, thank you, Erhan and Megan. And now a few times this question in one way or another popped up while I was revising. And one is cannabis came out a few times, which we know right now is a very interesting market, both because there's a discussion whether the big companies are taking over the market, and the other hand, what should small companies do? So one question, a good one is, there's someone asking, their company is 100% LGBTQ funded, and they've had a lot of success with friends and family. What would be your advice if they were to seek investment for a cannabis business that is also related to the LGBTQ community? So I think there's a couple of things we can answer here, both of you, the cannabis side and the fact that it's focused on the community and diverse and so on. You can start, Megan.
Yeah, so I can start more about investing. So we don't unfortunately invest in the cannabis industry, so I don't have a ton of deep insight that I can share there. But I think just in terms of positioning your business, I think what I've seen just personally is more and more businesses come out that are focused on the LGBTQ community because there is such a huge market opportunity. So being very clear on like what the white space is within that community that you're addressing and why it's as big as it is and why it's underserved in the current market today. That's how I would think about positioning it. I've seen companies both in the social dating space and healthcare that are serving this community, and I think that's what they did really well. Is just addressing kind of how they are uniquely addressing the white space within LGBT.
Yeah, and then maybe I would just extend that answer to say, in terms of any founder who's coming from a diverse background, the thing that I think really excites us is the unique insight that you've derived from having that experience. And it's like, I have this unique experience. I have this unique insight because I had this unique experience that other people haven't had. And that is going to allow me to build a massive business around X. And so that even if it's, tangential to building something that's specific to the LGBT community, I think it's also this idea of positioning yourselves as like a unique asset, like you're a ninja because you have something that other people don't, and that's going to be the differentiation that sets you apart from others. In terms of
I
cannabis,
agree, like the mission driven part, I think. No, I just want to echo, I think so many times we see like the next gen of founders are ones who are mission driven and can be shepherds for their brand and community builders. So just seconding what you're saying there.
Yeah. I guess in terms of cannabis, I think it's really tough because there's a lot of gray area that exists around the industry, and I tend to steer clear away from cannabis personally, and the reason is that there's like so many, like, if the very real reality is that, and I'm sure Megan has this problem too, there's no shortage of amazing companies that are coming on our inbox. And so the added amount of regulatory and legal and compliance that comes along with investing in cannabis is something that is really difficult. So to the extent that I think that there's probably funds that are specialized in cannabis and understand the regulations around it, is more so a fit. We sort of have to wait in terms, because that's not going to be our sole focus area. We have to sort of wait and see how the regulatory and the legal side evolve, and doing anything previous to that, I think, is just really hard. Although I think it probably means that we'll miss out on some amazing companies that are built in this industry, but it's just sort of the mechanics of how to get there is really hard. I mean, like it's almost the same thing for like crypto ICOs. Like that's also difficult, right? And it's again, it's these new like regulatory markets that are make it always a little bit more challenging.
So probably it would be safe to say that cannabis, sometimes it's better if you go to VCs that are focused on cannabis, which is many times the case. There are a few VCs that they only invest in cannabis and they write big checks. They have.
I think so.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think honestly that applies across a lot of different companies. Like if you are a healthcare company, starting with healthcare focused VC funds is the way to do it because that is their bread and butter, and then diversifying from there.
Now, for someone wanting to open a brick and mortar business, someone was asking about opening a cafe, a queer cafe for the LGBTQ community that would be a brick and mortar kind of business. Do you have any suggestions for people looking to open a business that is not directly a startup or a tech company or anything that we are used to? Like how do they find investment, or what should they think about in times like this before pursuing opening a business like that?
Yeah, I think the first thing, if you're deciding to pursue the venture route for your specific brick and mortar business, I think, again, narrowing your focus about who are the funds that you're going after. Think about funds that they already invest in four-wall businesses, and this is something that they're comfortable doing, because a lot of funds are less comfortable with brick and mortar. It can be seen sometimes as like a linear growth model where you have to just go brick by brick by brick to kind of get growth, and it's less, up and to the right. And so I think you want to be conscious of that. I think also, expanding who you're reaching out to for investment, maybe just beyond traditional VCs. Is it strategic investors who you may know have a passion for this space, and you can find a way again to get a warm introduction to them, or angel investors. But I think really being scrappy about how you're thinking about different funding options.
And now, how can founders be credible when making financial projections? Whether they come to you and you are already part of the board, or it's a founder looking for investment. What can they do to project the market and their business model, considering there's so much uncertainty? What have you been working with your founders to make sure these are accurate, and what should they do?
I guess maybe I'll take a stab at how we look at it at the series. Maybe actually, Megan, why don't you talk about it from the seed perspective, and then I can add on from the Series A perspective. That might be a better way to go.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, at the seed stage, we do a ton of discounting just in terms of financial projections, because a lot of times the companies that we're seeing are totally pre-product, pre-revenue. So it's all generally finger in the wind situations. I think your best bet is really taking into account how other businesses in that space, whether it's public companies or whatnot, taking into account some of those projections and using those as you're thinking about building out your financial model.
I'm going to say something that that is quite cliche, but it's sort of I think it'll be helpful for everybody to know that it's a thing. But there's something called 2T 3D, which is triple, triple, double, double, double. So it's this idea that you should triple your business twice and then double it 3 times. And so to the extent that that's, and I'm not saying that that's what you should make your financial projections, but I bring it up because I think you should know that that is a framework that a lot of VCs have in the back of their heads. And it's not always just revenue. Like, I actually think that they apply that sort of framework to any metric that you could have. Is it like user growth? Like, well, did you triple user growth twice and then double it 3 times? And I think that having that in the back of your pocket to know that that's sort of how they think about things is hopefully helpful. But again, it's not a one size fits all. And I think to the extent that it's like sort of a double-edged sword. So maybe just very quickly, one thing I want to say is that their revenue is but one metric that you want to think about from a projection perspective, but it really depends on the kind of business. Like, if it's a social consumer internet app, then potentially revenue doesn't make sense. And there's other metrics that you really want to focus on, and then being able to provide reliable forecasts on those. So potentially it's user growth, right? I think that becomes really important as you tell the story of your business. It's not always just a revenue metric. I think when I was at Jet.com, one of the things that Mark, the founder, would always say is like, what are the 3 metrics that we care about most? And what are those metrics that we wake up every day and look at to see how they're trending, to give us an idea of how the business is doing? And for us, it was, there was a number of metrics, and they sort of changed depending on the stage we were at. But you'd be surprised, like, a lot of times it wasn't top line. It was something like around customer retention, average order value, NPS, and then being able to see how we expected those to change over time. And then I guess, like, the last thing I'd say about the double-edged sword of forecasting any metric of your business is that if you're conservative, then it is very possible that if it's not high enough, then someone will look very quickly and be like, well, that's not a triple. So, like, obviously the market size isn't big enough, so I'm going to move on, right? And they sort of put it aside. And then the other end of the spectrum, and it's like, wait, this person, like, don't they realize that no business ever did a 20x from year 1 to 2? Like, that makes no sense. And they don't, they're not being rational. And so they put it aside. And I think maybe that's why people sort of came to this, like, understanding that if you triple twice and double 3 times, then everyone can sort of get along.
So maybe just find the sweet spot between the 2T triple D and make sure you don't go too high or too low.
You want to be able to sell the big vision, but having it be realistic in some sense. So you don't want to be overly conservative, because you should just know in the back of your head that whoever is evaluating your company is going to be discounting your numbers in some respect.
Yeah. And then also, just to add to that, even more, and just as importantly, of the absolute numbers in each year is the growth that you have between the years. So that's, I think, the absolute number, to some extent, sometimes that doesn't matter as much as what the growth looks like.
Now, as a few people were interested in knowing, do you think that investors invest in minorities, or maybe even any VC that invests in minorities, whether it's LGBTQ community, female-led startups, people of color, do you think that area will be affected, or is being affected more than if you were not a minority when it comes to finding investment, or it's not? And it goes back to what you were saying of, if you are passionate, if you sell the idea well, and you show why you are the right person, then you have just as good amount of opportunities.
I think for me, again, so much just comes back to the founder, and are they the right founder to build the business that they're trying to build? But I also think if you just look at the current landscape that we're living in over these past few weeks, there is a huge spotlight on what are VC funds doing to support underrepresented communities, whether that's through funding, whether that's through hiring. And I think you're going to continue to see that. I'm really involved in an organization called All Raise, which supports both female founders and funders. And we do a ton of work around, female founder office hours, a seed stage boot camp, trying to provide as many resources as possible. So when people go out to fundraise, their process is as easy, or, they've overcome some of the challenges up front that people just may inherently not have to overcome in other situations. So I'm hoping that we will continue to see more organizations and resources focus their attention in that way, and also just see funds kind of make that a mandate for themselves.
Do you want to weigh in there, Erhan?
No, I mean, like, I think it's really interesting because, I feel like saying that that it doesn't matter the background that you come from is all things considered, it's equal amongst everybody. Like, I feel like that paints an overly simplistic story, because I think it discounts the actual difficulty that people who come from diverse backgrounds and diverse stories have. And I was speaking with Megan about this a little bit, and oftentimes, like, from my view, it's like, as a Series A investor, it's much different, because at the Series A, there's a lot of data that we have. Well, not a lot of data, but like way more data than you have at the first check-in. So you can see, by then, like, investors will be able to see like the growth in your business and that the execution that you've had, and so those, again, like, you still want to be like the person that's painting that unique experience, and sort of like, as Megan said, being the right founder to build this business. But there's also, you get a little bit more at the Series A. You can like see whether that's actually true. Like, is this hypothesis actually happening? And even when we see like 3 or 4 months of the acceleration and sort of this exponential growth, like, we get super excited, right? And so some of the challenges, I think, of coming from a diverse background matter just a little bit less, because you're backed by like all of this data that you can sort of bring to the table and say, like, well, like, I'm building a massive business, here are the early indications, and let's go forth together. I think at the very beginning, when you don't have that data, it's much harder, right? And then I think from the perspective of coming from a diverse background, I think it sort of goes back to what Megan and I have been saying sort of over and over again, which is like, what's the founder market fit? Like, why are you the person to go and build this business? And then what are the unique insights or the experiences that you've had that will make you better at this than anybody else, right? And seeing that sort of maniacal vision around building something big and having that story, I think, is so important. But like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, obviously it matters, right? It's still the world.
Yeah, it is still the world.
Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Now, before jumping to questions from the attendees, if they have some, can you, Miriam, give me an example of a deal you wouldn't do or you didn't do because of COVID? If you have one, you may or may not have one, but you may.
Yeah, I can speak to that just more broadly. I think there are certain industries that are being outwardly negatively affected by COVID right now, and that I'm kind of pausing on. And then there are other industries that I'm looking at more closely because they're benefiting a ton from what's happening right now. So on more of the negative side, I'm not particularly diving into travel focused businesses at the moment, just because we are at like a complete standstill in travel. We don't know how that's necessarily going to rebound over the next 6 to 9 months. And again, even if you say at the beginning, I'm going to be heads down and just focus on my product, for the first few months. We don't know if there's going to be a second wave, and again, just like how the industry will shift more broadly. So there are a lot of unanswered questions. So not to say that I would never invest in a travel focused business, but it's just an area that I think has been more dramatically impacted by COVID versus others. Now, on the positive side, I would say like healthcare and life science businesses may experience a more favorable regulatory environment because of the age of Corona that we're living in, telemedicine businesses. And I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in the future of work. Beyond Zoom, we're starting to see a ton of collaboration tool companies come out that are really facilitating, this new world of work from home for everyone that we're living in. So I think, as horrible as this situation is, it's also creating opportunities in certain spaces as well.
Now, going a little bit back to what you were saying, this one is for Erhan. Like healthcare and telemedicine, those are industries that are hot industries, and also they don't just have a momentum. Telemedicine has been growing since before the pandemic, so you could say it's a bulletproof, so to speak, business that is good today and it will be good tomorrow. Now, Erhan,
Right.
What would you say aside from the obvious, like it's a COVID-19 proof business? What would you define as someone brings you an idea or a company you already invested in and what they do it's going to move past the pandemic or the crisis?
Yeah, there's an amazing founder based out of New York. Her name's Rachel. She's building a business called Micmac. You guys can look it up. But one of the really cool things that Rachel is like a phenomenal founder, and one of the things that I think was really interesting about her business as we sort of kept in touch is that she's like her business is doing really well even in the pandemic, and maybe even more so than previously, and partly it's because the platform that they're building is very much connected to the e-commerce media buying as it relates to CPG products. So imagine that the number of people that are buying a lot more of these like paper towels and diapers and all of, cereal online skyrocketed between today and perhaps 6 months ago, even though e-commerce was already trending from offline to online. That a lot of that growth came from direct to consumer, and it also came from traditional categories like apparel and electronics and home and furniture, but not really like, grocery is still very nascent. It's a $1 trillion market. So, I think it's hard to go back and say like, okay, here are the 5 ways that we think it's going to be, that we're going to see inflections, and how do these make it investable opportunities. I think Micmac is sort of the idea of something that's less obvious, right? That it's still the core to their platform is unchanged, but because of this shift that's happening in an inflection of CPG products being built online, that the demand for whatever technology they're building is stronger now than ever. So I think it's really interesting to see. I think obviously there's going to be companies that are created around the new way of doing things, and there's a lot more things that are just going to be obvious. But I think what I'm most excited about is like some of these less obvious inflections that we'll see, and founders that are able to recognize that and really apply it to put their company on the path to exponential growth. Because if you speak to Rachel, like she's incredibly brilliant, and she was probably the last person that was surprised that she sort of saw this inflection. She's like, see, like it's happening, like it's just happening faster now. So I think there's different ways to think about it, but I think Micmac is a really interesting use case.
What's the name again?
It's mikmak.tv.
Okay.
So look it up. Yeah.
Now we have a few minutes left. Does anyone have questions for Erhan and or Megan? Let's see if we have questions. Well, if not, who wants to take?
Oh, there's one on the open from Craig.
Yeah.
I knew this one was coming. How can you talk a little bit more about how you define as founder market fit?
Go ahead, Erhan.
I knew this one was coming. I'm like, oh, someone's going to like want like a very concise one sentence question or reply in terms of what is founder market fit. The way I think about founder market fit is sort of what Megan has been saying about like, why are you the best person to go and build this massive company? And partly it's from, you know, it's a number of different things. There's no one solution, but part of it is your experience. Part of it is like your skills, and part of it is like your ability to be a leader in whatever vertical or sector that you're targeting. So, you know, the very, you know, the crude way I think about founder market fit is like, if you've spent your entire career in let's say, how do I make it so it's let's say you've spent your entire career like you know, developing technology for VR and AR, and then you sort of decide to come and you're like, I'm going to start a business around building like a time series database to help developers like understand time series data better. You'd sort of go back and be like, wait, but you just spent like all of your experiences in VR, AR, like what are you doing in time series data? Mm-hmm. Right? Versus like someone who has spent the last 5 years working at a large software company, like speaking with a lot of customers and understanding the pain and anguish around like, you know, the ever-ending enormous pipe of data that's sort of coming to them, and the time series nature of it, that you sort of step away and say, I have this unique vision. Like I've interacted with 100 different people that are having these same issues, and I can draw the line and create a company that's building a better way for people and developers to manage time series data. Founder market fit. So it's like, it's hard to distill in terms of like a single sentence, but it's like, what are the experiences, or what about you make you the best person to go off and build and solve this big problem?
Totally agree. It's all around, you know, your founder story, your experience, and how obsessed are you with the space that you're operating in.
And now, last question. We have a few more, but there's not as much time. From JC, what's the most common mistake you see in first-time founders, Megan?
I think just in the beginning, and I think this is something that's really, you know, fixable, and I'll relate this more to like the fundraising efforts, is just not nailing their pitch and being extremely confident when they come through the door. I think that is like the first step of, you'll be pitching both investors, but then you'll be having to lead your team, and you have to be that visionary type founder. And I think practice, and doing it with as many people and getting as much feedback as you can. I think that's a common mistake that I've been seeing. So a lot of times, you know, for founders that we work with, not only do I offer to do as many practice pitches as possible, but we have a whole in-house team that as they're going to raise their Series A, we help them not only craft their pitch deck, but also practice the overall narrative, because how you deliver that is so critical to not only finding new investment, but also you'll use those skills in leading your team in a variety of situations.
Right. So
can I just echo that really quickly?
Yeah,
like, you know, have a good have a good presentation, like really be thoughtful about those slides. One trick, DocSend, actually, because they have all of this data, they come out with like different metrics around where investors spend the most time and what the outcomes are in terms of what certain decks look like and the percentage of time they get funding, which I think is really fun to look at. And Mark Laurie also, I keep bringing him up, but he has a lot of great content around what's the perfect pitch deck. And so there's definitely a lot of resources out there, but make sure that you spend a lot of time on it because it's super important.
What was again the place where there's that study about the slides?
I think if you go to DocSend, I think if you Google it, you should be able to see DocSend. Check the DocSend blog, like go to their resources and blogs, and then it's on my Twitter also. I posted it at some point. Yeah, if people want to go.
And really quickly,
take a look.
Alexander, on your question around entertainment, just quickly on that, I think something that we're seeing that's interesting is more so like the voice space that's happening in both entertainment and social. So I think people may have seen there's a company out there that's an audio-based social app that is essentially like virtual chat rooms called Clubhouse. They raised a $12 million Series A at like $100 million valuation. So, you know, kind of crazy valuation. But I think we're seeing this huge movement of people adopting more voice technology as a form of entertainment. So lots of stuff happening in that space.
Well, there you go. And I think if something we can take out of these conversations for everyone is that it's a well-known fact, at least for some of us, for someone that is new, maybe not, but investors need to believe in the team before they believe in the idea. Maybe your idea is amazing, but the team is lacking in different places. The investors won't write the check. On the other hand, is that if the team is amazing and the idea needs a few improvements, there might be room to do that. And talking about diverse founders from any side of diversity, if you go out and be amazing and show why you are important, why you are the right person to found this company, and why there's product market fit for your idea, that speaks about you before the fact that you are from a different background. And if anything, your different background makes you more interesting. So that's a very good takeaway from this conversation. You heard Erhan saying that he posts on his Twitter a few tips. So go follow him. There's go follow them in all the social media you can find them. And then if you have more questions, I encourage you to go to the StartOut's website and subscribe. It's free, so you can post them in the forum, or maybe we can help you to get more answers from them behind backstage. But anyways, Erhan and Megan, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate your making time for this conversation. It was really fun. We all learned something. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having us. It was great to chat with everyone virtually.
Yeah.
Stay safe and healthy, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.